Hello and welcome back, and that's right, today we want to return to the subject of unofficial upgrades of memory on your Synology NAS, and this time we're looking at this NAS right here, the DS723 Plus. Now, for those who aren't aware, the DS723 Plus is actually a surprisingly powerful NAS, given its stature, arriving with a dual-core AMD embedded Ryzen there. It also arrives with 2 gig of DDR4 ECC memory off the bat, which, although ECC is great, that 2 gig of memory is kind of a pain in the bum, and I think a lot of users, particularly those that are going to take advantage of the 10 gigabit upgrade option there on the rear of this device, are going to be looking at upgrading that memory. However, Synology memory modules aren't the cheapest, and although the system does highlight quite strongly in its support and in terms of its performance with the Synology websites that you have to use their memory, their branded memory, tested for use on Synology systems, there are a lot of users out there that want to go third party because there's a number of different third party brands in the market. And in today's video, we're going to be testing a few of them. Just like we've done in other videos, we're going to be looking at the Sabrent DDR4 memory, we're going to be looking at Crucial DDR4 memory, and we're going to be looking at Kingston DDR4 memory. Now, none of these are ECC error correcting code or error code correction memory, and also these memory modules are different sizes. We're going with a couple of 8 gigs there on the Sabrent, we're going a couple of 16s there on the Crucial, and a couple of 32s there from the Kingston, something which later on we'll talk about why this is something of a breaking point for some users. But before we go any further, let's get a quick disclaimer out of the way. Very important, what I'm going to be showing you today is very much outside of the intended remit use of this device as far as Synology are concerned. And if you encounter problems, or running this leads to the instability of your data or even data loss or the system packing up and dying, there is a possibility that Synology are not going to have your back when it comes to that support and that warranty, because you are using it outside of that supported remit there. So do bear that in mind. Yes, the Synology memory modules are more expensive and they are ECC memory to boot, so that's kind of the pricing there, but know that, you know, they're kind of trying to go with a one ecosystem thing here, and going outside of that, you can't really expect it to have it both ways when it comes to a lot of support from brands. And I think Synology very much feel that way. But as you can see here on screen, I'm squeezed into the bottom right there. We're going to try and do as few cuts as possible in this video, just to show each one using working in their own environment. If we go into the system settings, you can see our DS723, and as you can see, although it's normally having 2 gig of memory, I'm running this at the moment with 6 gig of memory. I've installed an official 4 gig Synology DDR4 ECC module, the supported module from this system. If we go into the resource manager there, we can see the full extent of that, and the reason we're seeing all of that extra usage is because if we go into here, I'm running a VM at the moment, and I am running Ubuntu, a version, I think 18 Ubuntu VM inside there. Bear in mind, because we are using the software OBS running here in the background, and we're trying to run VMs from within the web browser, we're going to see a drop in that frame rate there. So don't go too harshly on that. But as you can see straight away, we've got that memory there. We can see that we've got 3 gig of memory assigned to this VM. Why I've gone for 3 gig, I'll explain to you in a moment. But what you'll also see is significant CPU spikes. And that's because I've only assigned 1 CPU, a virtual core, to this VM. Now, why have I done that? Because as we scale up the memory, as we go through these testings, I'm going to be duping this VM. Ultimately, what I'm going to be doing is going from 3 gig of use to 6 gig of use to 9 gig of use, or editing those values. But the problem is, because this is a dual core 4-thread processor, we can't really assign that much in terms of CPU cores or virtual cores for each of these VMs. That's why you're going to see quite high CPU usage in these VMs, because we've kind of had our arm twist a little bit there in order to do it. There's ways and means around that with different kinds of VMs or even containers, but I thought this is the most graphically smooth, relatable form for a lot of you out there that want to see that information in real time. But again, well, that's why we've only got the 1 core assigned, and we've only got 3 extra virtual cores to play with there, and we've still got to leave some of it for the running of the Synology NAS. But what we're going to do now is we're going to safely shut down that VM. So we're within the VM, why not? We could force close it, but we're not going to. We're just going to shut that VM down. And as that VM is shutting down, what we're going to do here as soon as it's shut down is we're going to shut down the Synology NAS safely. It's shut down now, so we're going to go ahead and shut that bad boy down. Shut it down. And then when the system's shut down, what I'm going to do is carefully remove the drives. Again, do not repeat what I'm doing here today, particularly with the hard drives, unless you know what you're doing and also you're in a safe environment, because pulling drives out does have that element of risk, particularly during spin down. Again, I'm going to be doing it just to exacerbate the video a little bit, but I strongly recommend, if you're going to emulate anything I do today, make sure you take a little bit longer than I'm going to when it comes to the removing of those drives. Now, as the system shuts down, we're going to be going into our first test. Our first test is going to be our Sabrent modules. Another thing while that's shutting down I will stress to highlight is we've kind of got a nice closed-in thing here. As you can see, we're trying to maintain some audio levels here from within OBS. And we've got my mic here, my Ryzen, just straight there off shot. So the result is you're going to get some background noise and those drive noise as well. Again, I'm only showing this on camera to show you guys exactly what I'm doing, but there should be timestamps along the bottom so you can skip ahead if you choose to. So let's get our first drive, pop that down there. Our next drive there. The other thing to bear in mind, unlike a lot of Synology NASs that have kind of soldered memory modules inside them, let's actually remove the power as well. This device has got 2 available slots inside. So what you'll find is, unlike maybe the 920 or the 720 or even the 423 video coming up on that soon, that you may have seen us do, all of this has got removable memory through and through. So there is that 4 gig module that I talked about earlier on. Just going to pop that over there. And we're going to remove the original 2 gig memory module of ECC memory that Synology provide with this system. So now we're going to start installing our Sabrent. We're going to go for the back module first. It's always kind of tricksy with these Sabrent ones, because I don't know if you noticed, maybe I'll show you on the other one. The reason I include the Sabrent modules in these videos is because they arrive with a really nice heat sink, kind of a heat shield even attached around the edge of their panels. And when you get to the larger memory module, particularly 3200 megahertz, you may see even minimal improvements there to be made on that memory usage and performance thanks to those heat shields. So we've got both those modules inside. Hopefully you can make that out in the lighting. And what we'll do is we'll reintroduce our drive media. When the system boots, the amount of time that takes is a variable, but we'll get onto that in just a moment. Reinstate our power. We've got our power, and we're going to let that device start booting up on its own. So let's talk a little bit about boot times. Get rid of those. When it comes to the boot time that the system can take in order to identify and boot up for the first time, as it was highlighted out to me last year, some of the memory tests during DSM7.1, it actually can take longer the first time you boot a system up with fresh memory the first time. The reason being that the system's checking that configuration and configuration changes since the last shutdown. Now, again, Synology themselves, I'm sure, would be keen to say that if you are installing any new memory, that includes Synology's own memory as well, it's highly recommended that you perform memory tests. Ignore that tippy tapping, we do have an 8TB Pro drive in there, so you're going to hear that drive. But if you go into the Synology Assistant tool, go into the cog there, from the cog, make sure to put a tick into the memory test box, then click OK, and then from there a new option for memory test will appear. But bear in mind, when you do run a memory test and you click it there, this can take hours upon hours of time depending on the configuration of the system and the amount of memory. So when you do this, know that your system's going to be largely inaccessible during that time. I'm not going to perform that now, but for you personally, when you install any memory, first or third party, make sure to run the memory diagnostic tool later on. So there we have our beep, which in theory should mean our system is ready to access, so we can make our way in there, and we can go ahead and log in. So I'm kind of side saddling this microphone here just a little bit. So we'll get that logging in there. I believe I made sure that my VM does not boot upon the system boot there. So if we go in, Linux Virtual Machine Manager there, we got our virtual machine. Wait for it to load it. As you can see, it's powered off. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm now going to clone this VM. I'm just going to clone it, just one clone there, same configuration, and while it's doing that in the background, we can head into the control panel because I have a strong suspicion this is going to show that extra memory, and it has those two Sabrent DDR4 rocket modules there being identified inside the system. Remember, this CPU has a maximum supported memory of 32 gigabytes, so we're still well within at least the CPU recommended memory. But again, when it comes to the Kingston, that's going to be a very different story. But we've got our 16 gig there inside the system. If we go into the resource monitor there, go into the memory, we can see the system utilizing intelligent caching there in the background has already started eating that up. Before we power these VMs on, however, what I'm going to do is upgrade that memory a little bit, because if we've got 16 gig to play with there, we want to make sure we've got enough to use on the system. So what we're going to go with is perhaps 5 gig on each VM to play with. Now, that might lead to inconsistencies with the system only running on 2 gig, but we should be fine. But just in case, just be prepared, we may have to scale one of these VMs back. We'll go with 5 gig on those, and now we're going to go ahead and power those up. So it's 1 virtual core each. So this will open up our new 2 brand new VMs there. So this one we can open up a new Connect tab. So this is our original tab for that first VM, and now we're running 2 VMs running parallel side by side there. So you're going to see the utilization, and that's going to take a little bit of time for those VMs to boot directly into their respective user interfaces there, as we are still running again on a single core system for each of them as we flick between the 2 VMs. Hopefully they'll come through shortly. What we'll do is we'll skip forward a little bit, let it do its thing, and just a little reminder, in the description below is a link to the article we published now. The original version of this was from a couple of years ago, but we've updated it a few times with all of the unofficial memory modules that we've confirmed to be working. Again, I've not added this NAS yet because we're literally performing these tests now, but we'll be adding some of these newer NASs as they get tested onto that article linked below. And again, do make sure when you buy any of memory modules through those links, because using those means that we get a kickback and we keep doing what we do, but just make sure you are getting the right memory, because a few of the stores that we link to on that page, if that site doesn't have that memory in place, what they tend to do is recommend an alternative. So double check that model ID. But here we are in the VM, so let's open these up side by side. Have these opening up here, because I do believe we are going to be able to assign that memory. So at the moment there, we've got that 4.8 gig on that one. We're seeing CPU utilization obviously spike a little higher on that first one that we're using, but both of them are running on that memory that we wanted to assign. And we're starting to see the memory just slowly start to be eaten up by the host system in between the 2 operations we're running. But let's see if we can get that seen on there. Again, CPU utilization is going to be going bananas here. But overall, although it's not showing as host memory utilization, that's because it's kind of memory on demand, I would argue. I think for now, I would say that's still showing the memory for us on either one of those, and we've assigned those side by side, different VMs. And I think for now, what we're going to do is shut these down and then install our brand new crucial memory for the next test. So we'll go with that one there, shut this bad boy down. Again, I could fast forward, I just want to make sure you guys see that we don't skip anything out during these tests. So we can go for it there, that we should be starting to see those shut down, and we've got our memory modules freed up in terms of that host memory usage, and we can go ahead and shut this down once again. So again, we're going to let it shut. It's going to take 2-3 minutes and we'll get ready with our crucial memory. Now, unlike the Sabrent memory that I just showed you, I would argue the crucial memory is probably the more affordable of the 2. You do see crucial memory on offer quite a lot, not just your Black Fridays, your Cyber Mondays and your Prime Days, but just generally crucial memory, highly recommended across the board, and it's kind of a go-to with a lot of the Synology upgrades that we've talked about. Now, this is DDR4 memory here. This is 3200 megahertz memory, and this is the 16 gig modules. So a couple of those there. The NAS will shut down in just a moment. And again, as I mentioned earlier, these are not ECC memory. We've not gone for ECC inside this, largely because I don't have any, and it's actually surprisingly hard and a great deal more expensive for a simple YouTube channel such as this to grab hold of ECC memory on SODIMM form. So we'll start removing these drives. Again, can't stress this enough. If you're going to be repeating what I'm doing here, give these drives a lot longer than I am before you disconnect them, because what I'm doing is not advised, and I'm only doing it so we can keep within the single framework of this video. So remove the power. So we'll remove our successful Sabrent modules. Put those there. We'll make our way onto our crucials. Again, we've got those big old heat shields there that make these chunky. These should, in theory, go in a great deal easier. So there's our crucial. Put that in there. Always fun to get to the rear slots on this. Module 1. And module 2, both installed. So we can get our drives reapplied. Again, fast forward from the timestamps at the bottom. If you're finding this fantastically dull, I don't blame you. Let's go for that there. Pop in our power. And bosh. We'll leave that to do its thing. Again, I'll link to the modules either in the article below or just link directly within the YouTube description between them. Now, while that boot's there, and again, we're just largely going to be repeating everything we've done thus far, I will take this time to talk a little bit about those Kingston modules that we're going to be talking about after this. Now, the reason these are going to be a point of contention is these are two 32 gig modules. As you may have heard me say earlier on, the CPU inside this supports up to 32 gig maximum. So when we install both of these, this system is now going to have access to 64 gig of memory, which is pretty crazy town banana pants, right? Now, if it's not successful when we boot the system up, I'm going to remove one and only use one module on its own. But after we've tested these drives, which I'm pretty confident are going to work, we're going to move on to these Kingstons. Also bear in mind that even though the system will be able to see, and we've just seen the lights go on, even though the system has every possibility of seeing these memory modules, it's about more that the system is able to allocate them and actually utilize the memory, because the CPU has its own recommendation of 32 gig of memory on its own. None of them are ECC, so that's less of a limitation, but it's the idea of those Kingston modules there showing the amount of memory accessible to the system and the CPU actually being able to use it, which is always the area of contention. But for now, let's go ahead and refresh this tab. Make our way into the NAS. Again, both of these are going to be powered down, those VMs there, because they're not in action right now. Again, we're going to go into the virtual machine manager, and we're going to create a third VM there. As you can see, it's seeing an error there as it's booting it up for the first time. Don't worry. So now we're going to go ahead and clone one of these VMs again. So we're going to clone that. One more copy. We're not going to create a fourth because we don't have enough virtual CPUs for that. But now we're going to upgrade that memory, and this time going from 5 gigs, at the moment we're running on 32 gig, let's give each of these 8 gig of memory. Actually 9, let's call it 9 gig of memory. Quite a weird number there, but let's go with that. That'll add up to 27. So let's go ahead, edit 9 gig of memory. Carrying on. Apologies for the boredom of me just doing this here in front of you. 9 gig of memory. And while we've done all of that, so let's power these on one by one. And no doubt we're going to see the impact of this powering on in terms of performance, as now we're utilizing 3 virtual cores for these. So we'll leave that to do its thing. We'll also allow that to power that up and get a new tab open for our third VM there in the background. And while it does that, we'll go into the control panel to take a little peek, because again, I'm fairly confident. There we are, 32 gig of available memory being seen there. And if we go into the resource monitor there, we'll be able to go in, have a look at the memory utilization. And again, we've assigned a lot of that memory, of course, because we've assigned 3 lots of 9 gig onto our virtual machines there. CPU utilization, again, thanks to a lot of the settings that are inherently built into Virtual Machine Manager in terms of CPU and memory sharing, there's going to be a decent amount of fluidity to the specs that we've allocated thus far. If we have a little look at these VMs, so let's connect into them one by one. Connect in. It looks like they're all booting straight in. Let's open them all up on the monitors, respectively. Let's open them all up. Take a little sneaky look. They're all going to take a time, because obviously we've got almost no memory to speak of. There's our 8.7 gig of memory there. Once again, there is our 8.7 gig of memory. There finally is our 8.7 gig of memory. Bear in mind, if we go in to the respective system services for each of them, we can find out more information about them. So we're not going to need to do that here, are we? We can see there the individual systems due to the IDs at the top. Yep, they're all different identities there. So we've got all 3 of our virtual machines running there. And overall, I would say flicking between each of these VMs, allocation is still absolutely fine there. Ultimately, we're seeing that being used. We can see that maximum memory. And even though obviously there is the doubts around non-Synology memory, there's still the argument that for this, you know, we're able to see that memory. We can utilize it. But what about after this point? So now, this is where we're going to go for our shutdown and make our way onto the big finish about whether our 32 gig modules are going to work in this setup. Let's have a look there. Again, I could skip all of this. You'll just see me looking slightly oddly off camera, but I want to include this all in a single record. Let's go for that, shutting them all down one by one. Just going to wait until they all say powered off. Let's get ready. Are we still running there? Powered off. So let's shut the NAS down. Now, while it does that shutdown, we'll get ready for our 32 gig modules of Kingston memory side by side. And again, these are where things get chunky. There is all manner of modules there. Now, regardless of how you feel about Synology's position on memory, of all the parts of the Synology hardware that I think a lot of people may have taken umbrage with recently in the last few years in terms of compatibility when it comes to hard drives or SSD or even PCIe upgrades, I think memory is one of those areas that's really divided people a little bit when it comes to enterprise level users. Enterprise level users, as far as they're concerned, they would not expect to go third party on a lot of components. I think in that arena, first party hardware and upgrades is fairly standard. When it comes to the middle, the SMB, even Soho to a degree, small home office, etc., those users, they're the ones that, they kind of know what they're doing in terms of upgrades. So they're the ones that would have wanted to go third party. I don't think Synology's ever going to change its position. And in fairness to them, they are not the only ones that have this policy on the memory. They're just a lot louder and clearer about that messaging than I think a lot of the brands. We're just going to install these. But third-party memory, I think, will always be one of those elements that when it comes to individual prosumers and home users, where going third-party is always going to be a considerably more desirable option. Cool, we've got our memory modules inside. Starting to lose my voice. Fantastic stuff. Let's get these drives in here. And we're going for our final upgrade there. This is our 32 gig Kingston memory module upgrades. I've not tested this prior to this recording. But again, if this doesn't work, I'll try it again with one memory module inside. Let's have a look. We've got our power, we've got our memory, we've got our drives. Let's go for the boot. Let's see how it goes from here. Now again, even if it's able to see all 64 gig of modules inside, that does not necessarily mean you can use them all. Even if I assign them to our 3 VMs and I give each one of these VMs somewhere in the region of 18 to 20 gig of memory each, that is by no means a guarantee. And unfortunately, that would require a lot more individual and stress tests of extending the memory utilization. Running the 3 VMs side by side, although we may visually see that each of them has a bulk amount of memory attached to them, that doesn't necessarily guarantee that it's going to be seen. So I'm hearing the drive spin up. That's a moderately good sign. Although we've not seen the LED lights, normally during the initial testing where it can take longer for larger memory quantities, we sometimes find that the drives will not go directly into full spin. And we've got our LEDs as well. So this is quite a positive sign that we're at least going to be able to see the 64 gig being displayed there on screen. So we'll have a look there. We're just going to wait for our little beep there, and then we're going to do our 3 VM testing. And I think we'll think about wrapping this video up a little bit. And again, expect the full detailed article below and updates to the unofficial memory mega article there over on NAS Compares, link below. Plug, 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 plug. How self-involved. But for now, let's go ahead and reboot. We're rebooting in. We're going to log in. Do you know what? Just for once, why don't I use that drop down? Go into there. We'll log in. And again, before we even go into the control panel, we want to see that we actually can apply the additional memory to those VMs. So we're going to go into that VM cluster. We're not going to clone any VMs this time because we're already using 3 of the available virtual cores there. So we're just going to go into that first one. We're going to edit that and we're going to give it, let's go nuts. Let's call it 18. We're going to double. We're going to go for 18 gig of memory on that first VM. While it's doing that, why don't we just power it on? Let's do this gradual. Second VM, action this bad boy up. Go for it there. 18 gig. The fact that it's allowing us to assign 18 is a good sign as well. It means the system at least acknowledges that we have got those two 32 gig modules inside. While it does that, assigning another 18 gig there. And from there, we'll carry on powering on our individual virtual machines there. So power it on there, carrying on. And again, we'll just refresh each of these tabs. Let each of those VMs do their thing as they gradually make their way into Ubuntu. Next, go into the control panel, have a little looky look. Go into the information center, and boom, we're seeing the 64 gig of memory. They're at least being acknowledged by the system, the two 32 gig memory modules. And then from there, go into the resource monitor, of course. Go into memory, and boom, we've allocated all of that memory. We can at least see within the memory manager all of that available memory. Indeed, there on the right hand side of the screen, the resource monitor has already started clocking that up quite significantly there. CPU, of course, again, with resource sharing, dynamic resource sharing with the VMs, we're not going to see anything truly impactful there because we're not pushing those VMs on the CPU, but that is not the purpose of today's tests. And we'll come out of that there. We make our way into the VMs one by one. Start allocating our resource monitor for each. Oh, for some reason that one didn't boot up, or our access didn't go in. The boot of the VM was clearly working. It was just that I didn't refresh that well enough. Have a little look inside there. It's opening up the resource monitor, and boom, we can see access to that 18 gig. And again, mathematically, don't worry that it's a 17.6. That is a simple mathematical crossover from standardized gigabytes across. But again, we're seeing that utilization. We can at least assign this amount of memory for each of those. It would just be a question of running a process within them, but that's going to be something of a deeper test that hopefully you guys in the comments can make recommendations on how we can actively allocate the memory on this system with this CPU, because we are going to be running further tests with not only these modules, but some other modules coming in on the DS423. So if you can make recommendations below in the comments for ways to pre-allocate that memory, not just, okay, allocate's the wrong word, not allocate the memory, but actually absorb that memory so we can see those 3 VMs running parallel to one another, actually exhausting 18 gig of memory each in a usable fashion that's visually able to be seen. Do let me know in the comments. But apart from that, I would say, at least superficially, these memory modules have been successful there. Just do be mindful that you are running now a configuration, if you go ahead with this, that is not in Synology supported configurations, and therefore you are outside of that support remit. I know you think I'm being a big wet blanket about this, but we're still talking about your data, which could be potentially mission critical, and therefore running a non-supported setup could be problematic. It almost certainly won't, and the actual risk of a memory module out within the 32 gig being problematic is pretty small. But for mission critical data, is it worth the risk? That's up to you to decide. But thank you so much for watching. Links below to the memory modules and that full detailed upgraded article, which I'll add some more NASs and chips to shortly. If you've enjoyed this, click like, because it really helps me out to know what I'm doing right and wrong. Click subscribe as we test more memory modules and more NASs. And if you want to help us out here on the channel and you were going to go ahead and buy anything of any of the products we talk about on this video, please go to the description and use any links there or any of the links in the article that I spoke about just now to visit your local e-tailer if it is listed there, because if you do that, it costs you nothing extra. It's still going to take you to the store, and it results in a kickback coming here to NAS Compares. It's just me and Eddie, and allows us to keep doing what we do, reinvesting that into tools and into more content. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.